Good evening and welcome to the Legal Roundtable. I'm Shaniqua Gray. Tonight on the Legal Roundtable, we're talking about efforts to create a new breakaway city in the southern unincorporated portion of East Baton Rouge Parish, the new city of St. George. We'll be talking to city officials and others about the motivation behind the efforts and about what impact forming the new municipality would have on the city of Baton Rouge and East Baton Rouge Parish. The efforts come after two foiled attempts at creating a separate school district in southeast Baton Rouge. Those efforts were rejected in the 2012 and 2013 legislative sessions, in large part due to the fact that the area was not incorporated. Well, organizers are now seeking to do just that, incorporate and form a separate city in South Baton Rouge. If successful, St. George would be the fifth largest city in Louisiana with a population of about 107,000 people. St. George would be about 70% white and 23% black. The median income about $30,000 more than the city of Baton Rouge, and it would be one of the wealthiest cities in the state of Louisiana. These demographics have led to the issue gaining national attention and allegations that this is really just about white flight and an effort to separate from the predominantly African-American Baton Rouge, which is 55% black. Supporters of incorporation claim it is not an issue of race at all, but about creating better schools for their children and creating a more localized form of government. But the question is, if successful, what impact would it have on Baton Rouge and the entire parish, considering the consolidated form of government that has existed in the parish for so long? Well, according to an impact study led by LSU economist Dr. Jim Richardson, one of the most significant impacts would be a potential $53 million shortfall in the parish general fund, in large part due to the loss of sales tax revenue, about $68 million that would go to St. George rather than the East Baton Rouge General Fund due to the location in that area of several major retail establishments, such as the Mall of Louisiana and Perkins Row, even though residents throughout all of East Baton Rouge Parish significantly contribute to those taxes. While the proponents project a shortfall closer to about $14 million, the issue remains the same. A shortfall in the East Baton Rouge Parish General Fund could potentially affect all services provided by those funds, including police and fire protection and other public services. Additionally, the city parish's ability to pay retirement benefits and other post-employment benefits, such as health, dental, and life insurance, would be significantly threatened unless a newly formed municipality agreed to share those legacy costs. Otherwise, Baton Rouge would be forced to raise taxes or reduce public services in order to meet those financial obligations. And the East Baton Rouge Parish public school system could also be significantly impacted by the loss of sales tax revenue generated in that area. This would result in a decrease in the net revenue per pupil in the EBR school system going down, while the revenue per pupil in the newly formed school district going up. Yes, it would create better schools in the newly formed district, but it would potentially cause the East Baton Rouge Parish school system to suffer. So this begs the question, with all of these potential negative impacts on Baton Rouge and East Baton Rouge Parish as a whole, is this really about better schools? The study, although neutral, concludes that if establishment of an independent school district is indeed the central goal of incorporation, then forming a new city in order to do so would be a very costly and imprecise manner of achieving that goal, and would also be potentially harmful. Tonight, our guests will address some of these issues and answer some of the questions you may have about the potential financial, economic, and socioeconomic impact of forming this new city. Tonight, we have one of those LSU professors here that helped prepare the study on the impact of incorporation, who will further elaborate on some of those issues. We also have Baton Rouge Metropolitan Councilwoman C. Denise Marcel, who will also be commenting on those issues. Later on in the show, we'll be hearing from Baton Rouge attorney Yigal Bander, one of the plaintiff's attorneys involved in the lawsuit against the city of Central following its incorporation in 2005 concerning possible legal challenges to the incorporation efforts. And we'll be hearing from all of them in just a few moments, and they will be addressing these issues that will hopefully help all of us make a more informed decision about the impact this incorporation could have on this parish. We'll be back in a moment. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Legal Roundtable. We're talking about the potential impact of creating a new city in the unincorporated parts of East Baton Rouge Parish. In this segment, we're talking to LSU Professor of Public Administration, Dr. Roy Heidelberg. He's one of the professors who prepared a study on the potential financial, economic, and socioeconomic impact of forming this new city, and he's here to elaborate on some of those findings. Welcome to the Legal Roundtable, Dr. Heidelberg, and thank you very much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Dr. Heidelberg, before we get started, I would like it, if you will, for you to please explain how you all came to conduct this study that, I think pretty much everyone is relying upon and has become pretty much the authoritative source of information regarding this incorporation.
Sure. Jim Richardson and I were involved with a report that was also funded by the Chamber and the Foundation in August of 2012 that looked at the effects of creating a new school district here in East Baton Rouge Parish. Because of our familiarity with that report, we were asked again by the Chamber and the Foundation to do another report looking at the factual evaluation of the impact of creating a new city in the southern portion of the parish. And at that time, Dr. Jared Lawrence came on and assisted us.
Now, do you all take a position in this report?
No, we don't take a position in this report. Our focus is exclusively upon the numbers and looking primarily at what will be, in our best estimation, the impact of creating this new city.
Okay, now let's get to some of the findings that you all had, and I think one of the most important findings deals with what you all believe would be, based on the numbers, about $85 million less going to the Baton Rouge General Fund. Could you explain where that $85 million would come from? What would be the sources of that Baton Rouge would not be receiving?
Well, a large portion of that will be from lost sales tax revenues. About $68 million in sales tax revenues will be foregone because of the generation of those sales taxes in areas like the Mall of Louisiana or in Seagan Marketplace, which are in what is now the unincorporated parts of the parish. Okay,
and you all came to a conclusion that would probably result in about a $53 million shortfall in the Baton Rouge General Fund budget. Now, how do you all come to that conclusion?
Well, as you mentioned, the first place that we started with that was an $84 million loss in revenue.
Okay.
And from that, we worked under the assumption that the city and the consolidated government would be able to stop providing certain services in the unincorporated areas. And given that we don't really know what kinds of services they will stop providing, we did an estimation based upon generally a per capita basis. And that's how we arrived at the $53 million deficit.
Okay, now I know that one of the issues that you all had, I guess, or limitations that you all had, was that you did not necessarily have a budget that had been provided by the incorporators, so that, I guess, posed some problems. But since you all prepared your study, they have prepared, I guess, a response to that, finding that the shortfall would be closer to about $14 million. And I'm not sure if you've had an opportunity to look at that, but could you kind of talk to us about, the disparity between $53 million and $14 million? How is that accounted for based on your review of the budget?
Sure. I think you're referring to the press release that was issued, and I've had a chance to look at that. That is about a page-and-a-half statement. It appears that they used our $53 million deficit and then reduced from that a claim towards their obligations to legacy costs to begin with, and then also the constitutional offices that are right now maintained through the consolidated government. And we did not include that as a reduction from the original report. So what we did is we assumed that the consolidated government would continue to fund those constitutional offices because they are the only legal entity in place right now, presently, that can fund those offices. Their claims are that they will continue to fund those, and while we welcome that, that claim is not statutory and it's not legal, and so as of now, we're working under the assumption that those will continue to be paid for by the consolidated government.
And so basically that was pretty much an offer on their part to continue paying those things. They would have to be made law if that were to be the case, if they were to be required to take care of those expenses.
It's my understanding that their Metro Council, for example, would have to ratify that into law.
Okay,
Yes.
that makes sense. What are some of the services that are provided by the funds in the Baton Rouge General Fund that could possibly be affected by a shortfall?
Well, for starters, police and fire, those two services are geographically defined within the city of Baton Rouge. So we know how much is spent on only the city of Baton Rouge on police and fire. Now, of course, we worked from the presumption that the city of Baton Rouge and the consolidated government would maintain that level of services for police and fire. And so the services that will be cut will be things like Department of Public Works. That's a major, substantial cut that they will have to make decisions about. And other areas that will be cut, of course, will involve other services, like the Green Light District and things like that.
And you raise a good point. You talk about the Green Light District, because I know that that's one of the services that it seems like there's an overlapping between the various cities. And just from reading your report, I noticed that I guess posed another limitation you all had in even trying to determine what services are provided or would be provided by each of the municipalities within the parish.
Right. In the early 90s, a local services agreement was entered into between the unincorporated areas and the city. And what this enabled was that the city and the unincorporated areas could effectively share funds. So money raised in the city could then be spent on the unincorporated roads, on the unincorporated drainage and sewage and things like that. And what that did is it quite literally laid the groundwork for the development of things like the Mall of Louisiana and Seagan Marketplace. Because of that local services agreement, if you look at the budget of East Baton Rouge Parish, they don't really divide between what is spent in the unincorporated areas and what is spent in the city. And the result of that is, in our estimation, about 83% of the revenues, the expenditures, the expenditures are what we would call overlapping, which means it's very difficult, almost impossible, to distinguish between what's being spent in the unincorporated areas and the city of Baton Rouge.
Now let's talk a little bit about these legacy costs. Could you explain what legacy costs are? Could you explain the need for sharing of legacy costs with any municipality that would be formed, and what effect that could possibly have on the city of Baton Rouge if that sharing does not take place?
Yeah, legacy costs refer to the long-term health and dental and life insurance obligations to workers who worked for the consolidated government for a period of time. And so during their period of retirement, the part of their agreement was that their health insurance and their dental, perhaps, and their life insurance would be covered. And in this case, those expenses are scattered throughout the general fund and other funds. So it's very hard to isolate exactly where those funds are coming from and going. In the case of this breakaway or this proposed incorporation, if they do not fulfill certain obligations towards legacy costs, then that will, in the long run, have a very detrimental effect upon the financial conditions in East Baton Rouge Parish. But to be clear, they have said that they will contribute to those legacy costs. But that's something that needs to be worked out and fully ratified and done in a way that doesn't, in the long run, adversely affect the city of Baton Rouge and the remaining incorporated areas.
Exactly. And I really want to talk a little bit about education as well and the possible effect on the East Baton Rouge Parish school system. You all address that in your study as well, and you also talk about those legacy costs with respect to retiring educators. Could you tell us just a little bit about your findings with respect to the possible effect on the school system?
Sure. As I mentioned, Jim Richardson and I wrote an original report back in August of 2012 that looked at the proposed breakaway school district in the southeast portion. And there what we did is we focused on what it would do to the per pupil revenues available to the East Baton Rouge Parish school system. And our finding is that it would reduce those revenues. With this incorporation, it's likely to have an even greater impact because of the inclusion of the Mall of Louisiana, Seagan Marketplace, and Perkins Row. So whereas our report initially we looked at just the southeast portion, this incorporation would be an even more adverse effect on the school system.
Okay, well, thank you so much for this information, and thank you all for all of this hard work that is certainly has formed a great foundation for everyone to work towards in determining the impact that this incorporation would take. We'll be back in a moment with more from the Legal Roundtable. Welcome back to the Legal Roundtable. We're talking about the potential impact of creating a new city in the unincorporated parts of East Baton Rouge Parish. And in this segment, we're talking with Baton Rouge Metropolitan Councilwoman C. Denise Marcel, who has already spoken out against the incorporation efforts. And I'd hope that a proponent of the incorporation efforts would also have joined us in this discussion, but after several attempts, they have declined the invitation. But I would like to welcome you to the show, Councilwoman Marcel, to talk about some of these issues. As I stated in the intro, you have already come out against the incorporation efforts. Could you talk to us a little bit about what are some of your concerns about the impact this would have on Baton Rouge and the entire parish?
Well, first of all, let me thank you for inviting me to the show. Secondly, I'd like to say that I think that it will have a great impact on the parish as a whole. Pulling out over 100,000 people and they keep comparing it to Central, is like comparing apples to oranges. Central was a rural part of the parish, and their incorporation of a city was a lot different from what they're proposing to do. This particular instance, where St. George wants to be a city, I think would have a significant impact on Baton Rouge, disparity in race, in economics, you name it. The list goes on.
Okay, now what about education? Because that's been a major issue that I really wanted to talk about. What effect do you believe that this would have on the East Baton Rouge Parish school system and on education in general in the parish? Because that, we believe, is the primary purpose behind this.
Well, certainly I believe that it will have an impact on the education system as we know it, the public school system. The public school system is already struggling to meet the needs of the children in the entire parish. As we pull monies out of the parish, and I think that we first need to look at, okay, the millions of dollars that we have put into schools. So some of the schools that may be in this particular area that they may want, I think Woodlawn is one of them, is one of the schools that we just spent millions of dollars building. So what does that do to our system? As we go around building up the schools and promoting our students and doing new innovative things to bring a lot of our students out of AUS, which is unsatisfactory status, and that has been happening in EBR, then that's going to pull monies from the students.
And we have talked to the economist in the last segment, and he talked to us a little bit about how the revenue per pupil in the new district going up by a couple of $1,000s, while the revenue per pupil would be going down in East Baton Rouge Parish School System.
Absolutely.
As a result of all of the sales taxes generated in that area. Now, I also want to talk to you just a little bit about, and I went to the local meeting where they gave an update of, I guess, a lot of their primary reasons behind this. But in addition to wanting to form a new school district, they also indicated that they want to have a more localized government, and they want to address some of the issues that are central to that part of the city. Now, as a member of the governing authority, do you feel as though that there are issues that are not being addressed that are relevant to that part of the town?
I absolutely disagree with them, and in fact, the very opposite argument could be made for the inner city of Baton Rouge, where a lot of people feel that not enough monies have been spent in the inner cities, particularly the areas that I service, 70802, 70805. There were few dollars, if any, spent in my district on the Green Light Project, for instance. There were millions and millions of dollars spent in that particular area. And we need to look at Baton Rouge holistically, the parish overall. And so I can't say I don't want you to fix Bluebonnet because I didn't get anything in my district, because it's a part of a consolidated government that we have. And so those dollars were flowing out there, and they were not flowing in the area that I serve.
Now, also, race has become an issue. I think it's inevitable rather, because of the demographics that we're going to be left with.
Yes.
Do you have any concerns with any type of division in the parish as a result of separating out a municipality that has, demographics that are so inconsistent with what we already have in the parish as a whole?
Absolutely. I mean, we spent many years fighting the DSEG case, in which I formerly worked for one of the attorneys that was involved in that particular case. And so now I believe that if we do anything in the manner that they want us to do it, is actually taking several steps backwards. It is a racial divide. It's economically, it's going to be an impact and a divide. There are so many dollars, the Mall of Louisiana, Perkins Row, these particular areas that have been developed in this area, that they're going to use to only support their city. And I think it's unfair to the other citizens of the parish of East Baton Rouge.
All right. Well, thank you. I really appreciate your comments, Councilwoman Marcel. You have been outspoken about it, and I certainly appreciate all the information that you provided for our viewers. We'll be back in a moment with more from the Legal Roundtable. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Legal Roundtable. We're talking about the incorporation of the new city of St. George in the southeast portion of Baton Rouge. And in this segment, we're discussing what is being referred to as the incorporation wild card that could preclude the formation of the new city, even if there's a successful vote in favor of it on either constitutional or statutory grounds. Under Louisiana law, in order to incorporate, 25% of registered voters in the proposed municipality must sign a petition to incorporate. Once the petition is certified by the registrar of voters, the governor must then call an election in which only the registered voters in the proposed municipality can vote, and only a simple majority is needed in order to incorporate. However, there are legal bases upon which a municipality may be precluded from incorporating before there even is a vote, or even after there's a successful vote. And discussing this issue, we have attorney Yigal Bander. He was one of the plaintiff's attorneys involved in the lawsuit against the city of Central following its incorporation in 2005. And welcome to the Legal Roundtable, attorney Bander.
Thank you.
Okay, I wanted to talk about some of the grounds for legal challenges, let's just say, if this were to move forward. And could you discuss some of those grounds in two contexts? One being, I guess, possible legal basis that could occur even prior to a vote, and then possible legal basis for a challenge after.
Sure. The statute itself, the same statute that sets forth how a group of people can propose to incorporate a new city, also sets forth a mechanism by which the opponents of the incorporation can contest the incorporation as not being reasonable and being and having an undue adverse effect on existing municipalities. But even before we get to that, there are some fundamental constitutional questions that have to be considered. The first is whether it's fair and whether it comports with equal protection for a self-selected group of people to be the only ones who vote on something that is going to affect a lot more people. In this case, we've heard a lot of talk about how 100,000 people, if that's how many it is, have a right to determine their own future. Well, how about the other 350,000 people in the parish whose futures are going to be affected by what they do, or the 230,000 of those people who live in the city of Baton Rouge, which is certainly going to be affected.
Do you look at that as an equal protection issue?
That is an equal protection issue. What makes it a very serious equal protection issue is the additional element of race. And race is the big elephant in the room that I think most of us would prefer not to talk about, but it has to be talked about because the fact is that the area that is proposed to be incorporated would be close to 80% white, and the people who would be left in the city of Baton Rouge would be 60% black.
Okay.
There is something wrong in a part of the country that saw 250 years of slavery, followed by 100 years of Jim Crow, and then underwent a very painful desegregation process. There is something wrong in taking a step that resegregates the parish of East Baton Rouge.
Well, now let's talk a little bit about the statutory basis. And you said that, we know that should there be an incorporation, certain people would have standing to challenge that. And there has already been talk about possible legal challenges that may take place. What would have to be shown in that type of case?
Statutorily, any resident or any property owner in the area to be incorporated, or any municipality in the parish, or any elected official from any municipality in the parish would all have standing to contest the incorporation after there's a vote, assuming it's a vote in favor of incorporation. Any one of them would have standing, and it would be up to the court to make a determination that the incorporation is, quote, reasonable.
Okay.
And the statute specifically says that in making that determination, the court shall consider the adverse effects of the incorporation on existing municipalities.
And I think that at least some of what we've been talking about as far as, some of the economic effects that we've talked about and we've even discussed in this show might form the basis of some sort of adverse effect. And, some of the, resegregation, as you talk about, might form an adverse effect as well. And so just last question before we go, we have to go ahead and tie everything up. But if there is this legal challenge, this would be something that would prevent there from being an order of incorporation until after all of those appeals would be exhausted, correct? So I would think that even if there is a vote in favor of it, then it still might be a couple of years before this could really be a new municipality, right?
Well, I think certain constitutional issues could be raised even before a vote is held.
Okay.
After a vote is held, if the proponents of incorporation succeed, then you're right. Then the opponents could go to court, and until that determination is made there and even goes up the appeal chain, there is no incorporation.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. And so we'll certainly see how it all plays out. I really appreciate you commenting on these issues. And that's all we have time for in this edition of the Legal Roundtable. You can join us each week for the Legal Roundtable right here. And you can always keep up with what's going on with the show at www.thelegalroundtableshow.com. Till next time, I'm Shaniqua Gray.